This week, we are heading back to Underworld as Kirito and Eugeo finally made it to the central capital Centauria as students of the Imperial Swordcraft Academy. We got new characters in sight, the beautiful Sortiliena Serlut, along with Golgorosso Balto. Aside from the Raios and Humbert thesis, Kirito does find himself in quite a bit of trouble this week. Welcome everyone, and this is Art Online Alicization explained by Gamerturk, featuring episode 7, Swordcraft Academy. As usual, timestamps to individual topics will be in the description down below for you to navigate easily if you just want information on a specific thing. The episode does have major and minor cuts all around. First off, an entire chapter from the light novels were cut, relegating the entire Zaccaria tournament into a 45-second flashback with no world or character building involved, so I strongly recommend watching the special explained episode I published summarizing the entire Zaccaria chapter and its significance to the story in general. But if you're not familiar with my Alicization Explained series, I aim to provide you the most accurate information about the changes as well as things you may have not realized when watching and explain the key details of the episode. But you can always choose to be blessed by the goddess of creation Stacia by getting the light novels for yourself. Amazon affiliate links will be in the description. Also, apologies, but I will be using more still shots and a film filter on clips due to the aggressive nature of Kadokawa claiming the videos, blocking them worldwide, so I do hope you understand. But without further ado, the episode starts right after, the episode starts 2 years after the duo left the town of Rulid, with a cool reference to episode 3 when Selka was waking Kirito up by pulling the blanket away from him. Sadly, we got no Sugua hallucinations this time around as Kirito had spent 2 years already in Underworld and adapted accordingly. Obligatory mention of the title card not switching from beginning to running again once more, and this marks the end of our lovely hopes of it ever changing again, at least for the first core in my opinion. I am still holding on to hope that it will change accordingly sometime in the future. After the opening though, we are welcomed to an anime original scene, and this is where an entire chapter of content has been covered, in a 45-second flashback with no context whatsoever. It was quite sad to see, to be honest, as this skipped chapter of the Zaccaria tournament established half a dozen concepts in Underworld as well as serving a huge purpose for world building as well as character development in general. We see Kirito sleeping without a cover, leaving him open to catching cold, the Valde family including the twins, one with a ribbon, Telene and Telur, as well as Eugeo defeating his opposition in a stop-short combat, and Kirito resorting to using sword skills against the noble Egom Zacharite. Also, small nitpick incoming, the anime showcased Kirito initiating Snakebite before Egom initiated his Blue Wind Slash, but in the source material Kirito only used this skill because Egom was aiming to injure or even kill Kirito by using a skill on his own. Sadly, this doesn't cover anything meaningful in terms of substance of what that chapter was building up, and since I was prepared for this skip, I actually published a special episode of Alicization Explained summarizing the entire Zaccaria chapter as well as highlighting its significant bits, and you can watch that and come back here afterwards if you want. But the beautiful Sortiliena Serlut makes her first appearance in her casual outfit in this anime original scene, a noble in Underworld and the elite disciple of Kirito, effectively mentoring him in his first year at the academy. We also get to see Golgorosso Balto, who Eugeo acts as the trainee page to, but I don't think we will see a whole lot more of him considering the little time he has even in the novels in the first place. He'll probably show up next week though for a bit, and of course we get a name drop for Volo Levantein, the first seat as in first ranking second year student at the academy. But when Eugeo mentions that he can't imagine beating their upperclassmen, Kirito seems a little curious about that remark due to certain things he felt in prior events, and this is explained in the next scene. You see, Stacia window is very limited in terms of the stats go into making Underworld what it is, only showcasing object and system control authorities and the durability. These were information Kirito figured out but not explicitly stated back in episodes 2 and 3. And while there were other hidden stats and parameters as well as mentioned by the observer in the skipped chapter of Zaccaria, your thoughts, or in Eugeo's terms, your quote-unquote imagination, also had an effect on the world. This is in fact due to how Wrath can run such a large-scale simulation and is technically a side effect of all the related methods of efficiency involved. Underworld essentially uses the memories of the living in this world as processing power as well, and instead of creating 100% of the world with its own resources, it takes data from the Underworldians as well, effectively causing certain unintended results. If you truly believe in something, you can temporarily overwrite the world data and use this to your advantage. Of course, as an outsider, Kirito somewhat learned of this fact throughout his experiences. However, not many Underworldians are aware of this quote-unquote abnormality, despite most of them are actually taking advantage of this as well, knowingly or unknowingly. Nobles with proper training are not just better because they received extensive training, they are better also because they have a sheer amount of confidence pushing their imagination forward as well. However, it is not as simple as Kirito had put it here, as he's still exploring the idea himself. In fact, let me clarify this first. Some people seem to believe that this concept is new to Sword Art Online in Alicization. However, if you think about it as overwriting the system, it's not really a new concept. It's more of an unintended exploit of how networking with individuals' brains work in general. Very primitive versions of this were portrayed as far back as in Aincrad, with events like Asuna breaking out of paralysis early, Kirito staying alive for mere seconds to defeat Heathcliff, or simply outright overpowering the gravity during his fight against Sugo in Fairy Dance. But a key detail, once again at a time where A1 decided to pay attention again, when we see the Axiom Church Tower, we see the statues around the ledges again. Woo! Don't you just wonder why I'm being so stuck up on those statues ever since, episode 2 as well as the opening? Ha! Not gonna tell ya because I don't want to spoil ya, but these are the details that'll put a smile on your face once the time comes. With all the attention put into them by A1 as early as the first couple of episodes, well, half the time the detail just doesn't seem to be there. Still, next morning brings us back to the light novel's content, with Kirito and Sortiliena Serlut having an extensive sparring session. The scene, however, was cut a bit short. Some of Kirito's thoughts process was covered in the previous scene at the dorm, as well as Eugeo and Kirito's talk back at the street, talking about Liena's skills and the amazement they felt that she was only the second seat elite disciple and Volo was supposed to be even more powerful than her. But a large chunk of that was mentioned in relation to the power of imagination, which I'll be referring to as incarnation from here on out. Kirito was certain that due to his experience with the goblins, his level, or rather object authority, was much higher than Liena's, but the fact that he was still struggling so much to her Serlut style forms was the proof how much training she had went through and how much self-confidence she possessed. During their sparring sessions, Sortiliena mentioned that he picked Kirito as her page because there was something different in him, his sword style not being the Norkia style that they were learning at the academy. The order of the dialogue was changed a bit. In fact, this entire dialogue was actually taking place right when their swords clashed and locked into each other. Surely, it would look weird in anime form to have a drawn-out dialogue in such a stance, so I won't be making a fuss about it. With the emotional At Our Parting soundtrack playing in the background, Liena opened up to Kirito in this instance. Something was preventing her from defeating Volo. Not a lack of training, mind you. Liena was known as the Walking Tactics Manual due to her extensive knowledge, but she faltered when she faced Volo Levantein every single time. She just lost her confidence. Kirito knew the main underlying reason, of course. Liena saw Volo as an unbeatable opponent, and thus it was the self-realization of a prophecy she created in her mind. But Liena also knew Kirito was hiding something from her. She asked him to show the best of the Aincrad style, but with a low-tier training sword, not being capable of using high-tier skills, Kirito promised to show it to her the next day. And he was using a neat tactic he learned back in Zakaria. It was forbidden to train during rest days, but there was no rule against giving someone a present, whether it was just a flower or a sword skill. But Kirito was soon to learn that he had no clue as to how that fulfillment of a promise would come to be. Back at the dorm, Kirito is confronted by Miss Azurika to showcase the strict rules of the dorm, but honestly, with the limited time we have with these episodes, I'd much rather have had Miss Azurika's second scene, since it was such a build-up for the future, but we'll get there, we're not there yet. Back at the dinner, however, we get to meet the resident dicks of Imperial Swordcraft Academy, two nobles, Raios Antinous and Humbert Zizek. That would be the only introduction I'll provide on them. We'll get more of them later, probably next episode. But that takes us to the garden at the academy. Eugeo is surprised that Kirito is having so much fun playing gardening here. However, Kirito's real reasoning was skipped here due to being an internal monologue. Kirito specifically wanted to grow these flowers called the Zephylia flowers, well, mainly because Liana wanted to see them in real life, the flowers that bloomed nowhere outside of the Western Empire. But Kirito wanted to challenge that idea as well, using what he had learned so far based on the principles of incarnation we talked about earlier. It simply wasn't allowed by the system that the Zephylia flowers would bloom in the northern quadrant of Centauria, and this was usually solidified by everybody else around the area taking this as a fact and believing in it as well. However, Kirito was nurturing these flowers with his wishes as well, hoping to break the system in a very minor way to prove his theories. He already had failed multiple times so far and he was running out of time, and a bit that was skipped here was that this time he was also having Eugeo pray with him for the flowers to bloom. But this scene right here also features a neat exchange between Eugeo and Kirito. The boy in black is quite skilled at dodging Eugeo's questions every single time and boosting his morale, and that is once again what he does, standing by Eugeo without telling the truth. Also, the soundtrack piece running in the back is Everyday Life once again from Aincrad. It's a great scene and it surely will be great to see the progress of the flowers that we did get to see a little in the opening. But Raios and Humbert have some other plans. Next up we have the creation story of Kirito's new sword, currently named the Black One, but don't worry, it will receive a proper name in the future. I'll quickly gloss over this scene since it was pretty accurate. We see a skipped scene that was supposed to be included in episode 4, the previous carver of Giga Cedar, Old Man Garita, telling Kirito and Eugeo to cut off the top branch of the tree and bring it to Sadore in Centauria. He had promised to carve the branch into a sword in a year's time, and now was the time to get it back. And once Kirito grabbed the hilt and pulled the sword, there was only a single thing he felt. A very familiar feeling. The same thing he felt when he held the Anneal blade in his hand for the first time in floor 1, Queen's Knight blade on floor 9, Elucidator after the floor 50 boss battle, Dark Repulsor Lisbeth forged for him, and Excalibur in Alfheim Online. A thrill that only appeared in rare occasions was exactly what he felt when he held the beautiful new sword in his hand. The only major thing that was skipped in this scene was that Kirito, holding the heavy blade, actually accidentally tried a skill causing some quote-unquote collateral damage, which would trigger the taboo index if Sadora had not forgiven them. So that was the little bit that you would have learned from the scene if the anime included it, but now you know. And well, back at the academy, sadly the second scene of Miss Azurika was skipped that was supposed to act as a huge tease for the future. Students were allowed to bring their own weapons to the academy, but they had to register them, and Miss Azurika suddenly froze when Kirito filled out the form. She was stuck looking at the object priority, the class 46 object, one level higher than that of the Bluro sword. She muttered a single sentence. "Do you have that sword's memory?" Before Kirito could even question, suddenly she blinked and her gaze returned to normal, leaving Kirito and us, the viewers and readers, to speculate what she actually meant for the time being. But afterwards, Kirito was getting ready for his surprise, with Volo Levantein watching from a distance as he trained sword skills on this training-free day. He used various sword skills here and actually was confused as to how some skills, for example Slant, a skill he used tons of times, had somehow acted differently back in Sadore's shop, causing damage to some other items outside of his range, despite him not even attempting to use that skill in the first place. But when he tried it here in the woods, it didn't even reach any further than the designated system limits. Starting with basic 1 and 2 hit skills, he ramped up the hit count to test his new sword, capable of doing much more than the mere training swords. 3 hit skill, Savage Fulcrum. 4-part attack, vertical square that you see in the anime here with the blue glow. He had tried 5 hit skills with Bluro sword, but never actually managed to initiate them properly. The black one had a higher ranking, so maybe it would be able to. Maybe. That was the key word. Despite focusing on a mental image of a 5-part sword skill, the doubt was already embedded in his mind, and inevitably the skill had failed, launching dirt towards Volo Levantein hiding out of sight. At the beginning, Kirito had thought he'd be in trouble for being caught training on a training-free day, but Volo had something else in mind. He wanted to challenge Kirito, and he was going to do it not with the training swords, but with the real swords they had. Disciplinary punishment for disrespecting an elite disciple by throwing dirt on them. Kirito had accepted the duel. He didn't know it was gonna be a real duel, rather than the usual stop-short duels of the Underworld, and he had no other choice than to accept, or so he thought. An hour before his promised meeting with Sortiliena Serlut, he was forced into a deadly surprise, and that wasn't the only unfortunate surprise in sight. But that is it from episode 7, Swordcraft Academy. Before I move on to the teasers without spoilers for the next episode, let me share my quick opinions. Unlike the fact that I hated the changes in episode 6, because even without reading the novels, military couldn't have just been that stupid to give a young adult that they shared the top military secrets with full internet access so she could share the secrets with her friends. While I do not enjoy significant world building and character development scenes being dropped, from an anime-only view, I still do believe this was a solid episode on its own. I mean, what can I say? If there was no dropped scenes, what would happen to my job of explaining these details and entire skipped scenes? Shutting off my light novel side, however, the episode pacing felt really good, it had great scenes and animation, and I like how they are hinting at certain things. Sure, I'd prefer not sacrificing light novel scenes in favor of pointless anime original scenes, but I had no major issues this week, a damn solid episode, and that's pretty much it. However, next week's Alicization episode is titled Swordsman's Pride, effectively hinting at Volo and Kirito duel of course, but also to another upcoming event that will wrap up Volume 10 Alicization Running, as Kirito's pride and entire dedication for the year is put on the line. It is hinting at what I consider to be the most beautiful scene I have seen or read in this series so far, and I do hope enough time will be allocated to it to portray it perfectly. Higa vs Higa scene in the previous episode was one of my favorite scenes, with how eerily unnerving and uncomfortable it made you feel at how realistic the scene and the reactions were. However, the scene next week will be the exact opposite. It's one of the most bittersweet moments, a whole lot of anger filled with grim hope and happiness. I just can't wait for it. And last but not least, let's address Foxen issue again. As many people seem to be having issues with me trying to ensure he doesn't spread misinformation, I made myself very clear and I'll do it again. A YouTuber who is trusted by his audience has to respect that trust. We all make mistakes, as do I every single day. But as people with influence, we are also responsible with correcting our mistakes so we don't spread misinformation to an unsuspecting and trusting audience of thousands. I tried contacting Foxen, but it didn't seem like he liked receiving any feedback, so considering I have an audience that overlaps with Foxen, I feel like it is also part of my responsibility to those who trusted me to ensure the mistakes are corrected, even if they don't originate from me. I'm not here to milk the situation for money, it's not what I do, so I won't be making videos on Foxen. So every week I'll be providing a short written community post titled Foxen's Fails. I don't think my clickbait game is too out of the line towards a creator who goes with titles like Dying Kirito Kidnapped 2, Angry Yasuna Unleashed. The posts are gonna be kinda lighthearted, just providing simple corrections in hopes of convincing him to, at the very least, correct his mistakes on videos with a pinned comment or something, as creators with some sort of an integrity tend to do when they make mistakes. Contrary to what people seem to believe, I'm not here to steal Foxen's views or discredit him. I just want him to provide correct information solely because he can inform people much better than I ever can, having an audience 10 times of my size. And honestly, I can only be happier if he proves me wrong and starts sharing correct information, because a huge channel like him sharing valuable, correct information can only do good for the entire community and the Sword Art Online series. Sure, some people take this as an attempt at me trying to fight him, and after all this, what I do on my channel, what I do on SAO subreddit, the time I spend on SAO Wikia to ensure correct information is accessible by everyone. If that is really what you think of me, then I cannot stop you. All I can say is, I just want the best for the series and the community around it. No outro speech this week, I just want to make sure my stance was clear and nothing more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.